everybody here that's here this morning. We're going to continue into our class, of course, of Joshua, as we're going to be looking at Joshua. And of course, we'll begin with a couple of our questions that we always do beforehand. So this morning we'll be looking at Joshua, the spies in Jericho. He's going to send spies into there, just 2 of them. You learned his lesson, of course, from what happened last time when he was younger, 40 years before that. So we see here, begin with the first question. We'll go back to Noah, Genesis 6. And why was God sorry that he had made man, that he made humans?
It's all wicked.
That's right, they're all bad, they're all wicked, even their thoughts, it says. In their thoughts and intentions, it was terrible. And God was very angry about it, not happy at all. And everybody was on the earth, it said everyone except for that of Noah. And some say, well, his family too. It doesn't say that. It just says Noah. And, he just got his whole family to go on the boat, of course, on the ark with him. Go to the next question, all the way back to Matthew 3 with Jesus. How lowly did John describe himself as compared to the coming of Jesus? Matthew 3:11. Somebody said exactly. Wasn't worthy for his sandals, to wear sandals, and basically to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, to do those things. And we see at that point, and that's the humility that was found in John. The next question, as a group, the New Testament books from Romans through Jude are called the what? They're called epistles or letters. Exactly right. You see that. All right. You say epistles nowadays, we'd be like, what does that mean? And so you tell them letters. So we have that. And then they'll be going, oh, they meant letters too? Well, yeah, they did. They were books. But we have them today, of course. Okay, so the next one, all the way back, going back to Moses, Exodus 18. How did Jethro advise Moses to divide the responsibility of judging? Exodus 18:21. It had on here Exodus 18:19, and I was like, that don't make sense. So I changed it to 21. 21 gives the numbers. Anybody know? How do you say to divide them up? He said, first of all, choose sound men are obedient to God, right? And then he said, break them up as how? Start with thousands?
Thousands and hundreds and tens.
50s
and tens.
Exactly. He said, break them up like that, and then you'd be easier. So the judging would be done by per people there, basically the questions they're answering. And Moses would only be there then for the more important ones, the ones that needed him to answer. And it made made a lot of difference in his life and him with the others. What form did God take at Mount Sinai when he was going to speak with Moses, letting all the people hear? Form of what? He did this during the day. Jesus was this during the daytime when he was guiding them. Came down as a cloud, exactly right, as a cloud, as we find there. What 2 men were allowed to climb on Mount Sinai while God was present? Exodus 19. This is the first night, Exodus 19:24. Who would that be? Moses and Aaron, exactly right. We go on to the next point, Exodus 20. To whom does God show loving kindness? Exodus 20, verse 6. That's exactly right. That's what he says there. He said, I've heard some people say, oh, everybody. Well, God is love. But we need to understand, he makes it very clear here, those that love him and keep his commandments. And what we mean by that when he says love is that he will take care of them. And they will be with him in the end, in heaven, if they follow everything he says, where others that don't. Sorry about your luck. It's really not luck. It's what you just decide to do and to follow. So we go to the next one. Where did the Israelites stand while God spoke to them from Mount Sinai? Where did they stand? Remember, they were about 6 miles away first, and then they all came up to the what? To the edge, the foot of the mountain, it says, to the foot of it. So they'd be right there at the foot of it. And were they allowed to, but the reason why, were they able to touch the mountain? No, God said, don't let anybody come upon this mountain in case they take the chance possibly of looking up at him, is what he said. And they would surely die if they did that. So, going on to the next one, here we find Joshua. When did God tell Joshua to meditate on his law? Joshua 1:8. Day and night, all the time, basically. Next one, which 3 tribes have been granted an inheritance to the east of the Jordan River according to their requests? Anybody remember that?
Reubenites, Gadites.
Reubenites, Gadites, and half of Manasseh. Very important. Yeah, remember when you look at the map, you have Manasseh on this side of the Jordan, you have the rest of it over here on this side through all that of the land of Canaan that we would see. Very good. All right, so let's jump into Joshua 2. We're going to Joshua and we're Going to start here with the spies of Jericho, as we stated. Joshua's going to send these spies in there, and you know, this is important. You think God needed them to spy out the land to know what was there? No, He didn't need it at all. He did it for them to know and understand, but also for the whole world to basically understand and see God's power, His strength. And it's already happening because Jericho here heard everything about God and the people of Israel. And they're really concerned. They're really worried about this, what's going on here. So let's begin this first part as we'll look at this area, Joshua 2:1, showing where they were basically stationed, where their area was on the east side of the Jordan before they crossed over to Jordan and going to look at Jericho. Someone go and read for us Joshua 2, verse 1.
Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from Acadia to Grove to spy secretly, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came to the house of the harlot named Rahab. I can't say her name now.
Yeah.
Rahab. And lodged there.
Good enough. All right. So as we look at this, we think about this. I will say this: the name is Acacia Grove. There's 2 names that's understanding. King James Version says Shibman, and when you look at that word here, that was the word that was used, and it's really referred to now as Acacia. But on this, I'll show you this right here. This is the way it was referred to at that time. And this is where they were. So you see there, Jericho's not far. You can see actually from Jericho, you can see the river of the Jordan. You can see the basin, the valley there of it. And here Shimmon's a little bit farther out. You can see they're up over the mountain and right here in between these 2 mountainsides right here, if you can see that. So they're in a good place where they're hidden, where they're not going to be bothered. Basically, it's known as the plains of Moab. It's just a few miles east of the river there. Joshua is now, of course, the leadership role. He's taken over from Moses. And we know that he showed his faith to God by his activities, the things he's done. In fact, James mentions it in James 2:22. And knowing about his confidence, his divine promise for conformity, he's able to conform to the ways of God. Now remember, very important understanding of Joshua, where was Joshua born? Anybody remember? Where was Joshua born? Just think about how old is he? He's in his 80s, 85 or so. And where have the Israelites been for 400 years? Egypt. So he was born in Egypt. He was one of the ones born in Egypt. And as we see that there, just give you an idea. So he is seeing, everything that went on there, but he's also seeing the life of Moses. He saw what Moses has been doing now. And, Moses and him, of course, would get to know each other very well. And we see this, and God would tell Moses about him and the importance that's found in him. We also understand, here's Jericho. I'll give you an idea what it looked like back then. If you notice, it has 2 walls. A lot of times we don't think about that. We think about just 1 wall. But all the walls fell, not just the outer rim. So here's what you call the lower wall that extends around. This is the wall that Rahab would have lived on. Then you have here, of course, the upper wall that we see that comes around and protects it. It's basically built to be a fortified city. And this is the important part about it. Jericho thought they would never fall. Because of the way it was built, the way it was fortified. It was up on a little bit of a hill. So when you're on a little bit of a hill, remember, you can see down in areas. It wasn't real high. But there were mountains around Jericho. But back then, of course, they didn't have sharpshooters and stuff like that. Snipers and so on. Everything was hand-to-hand or arrows. So when you look at this, you think, okay, this is quite a bit. Hopefully this makes us understand so much more about why this was so huge when the walls fell. In fact, the writer of this, we see basically this is from archaeology. It says, archaeological excavation revealed that Jericho was violently destroyed sometime toward the end of the Bronze Age. The walls seem, notice what they say, the walls seem to have been thrown down by sudden force, as if by an earthquake. No, not by an earthquake, it was by God. And then it says, charred wood shows that what was left of the city was burned. Excavators have also found, this is really interesting, food supplies. They found food supplies buried in the destroyed city, which shows it was not captured by siege. What that means is, they were surrounded for the 7 days, but what it means and understands is that it wasn't something that was just held and fortified. They were fighting on it, knocking down the walls over time and so on. It caught them off guard, and that's what we find here with all the food that would be left over, and that was there. So that's Jericho there. Here's another, this is what it is today. This is what you see today. It's all that's left of it. They're excavating it, of course, and you can see here, and we find that as we see here that it is known for its oasis, like the balsam and palm trees you still see surrounding it today. It was the first target of the invasion plan of the Israelites that God sent them through. And we know as a wise military tactic Two spies, of course, we see, we're going to read about this morning, were sent in there to see what was going on, how strong they were, and so on with it. And as we stayed there, I will say this, this is why we find, let me see, Israel was not told of the plans, we know that, not told at all. Joshua had seen firsthand, have to remember, being one of the spies of the 12 in Canaan, him and Caleb, the only two that came back and said, we can do what?
We can do it.
We can do it. We can take it because God can do it for us. He will do this. And this is why we find Joshua and Caleb are actually the only two adult men that started the trip out of Egypt through the 40 years in the wilderness. They're the only two adult men to still be surviving. The rest were all children or other people that were born. We see through the women would have came in also, of course, but none of the men. And we find that in Numbers 14, 24 through 30. Someone read that real quick for us, see what it says.
My servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring him to the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. You shall by no means go the land which I swore I would make you dwell.
Thank you. Now, there's a longer reading with this, of course, in the context. Basically, what we see is God and Moses, Moses going along time, basically that none of you people are going to be able to go in the wilderness, okay, because of what you did, because of your sins, your disobedience. And because of that, that's when he says, you will, in Numbers says, you will travel for 40 years in the wilderness. And we see that. And I mean, imagine, I always think about that when God told Moses that. It probably had to have been like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I got to be with these people for 40 years? Are you serious? But he does. Mom, go ahead.
I always wondered if the two walls was a common thing at that time.
No, it wasn't. That's what we see with Jericho. Well, I believe, sometimes you would see it, but usually you'd have really big fortified one walls and all the city would be in it. And you'd have houses and parts of the main, like if you want to call it a castle or whatever, would have extending walls, usually to the walls, and were separated by a little bit so nobody could overrun it. So this is why I believe part of why Jericho, was chosen. It was basically a town, a city that was, that would not come to the ground, that would not be defeated. And it's important to see that. But God, leveling everything at one time, as we see here, and all the people being destroyed, we see it's exactly what happens. And yes, so that's what we find with it, that you wouldn't see that as a common thing.
When they marched around, was it just the outer wall?
It was the outer wall. Yeah, it was the outer wall. Yeah, they stayed outside. So all they did was the outer wall, and then everything fell, the outer and the inner. And and like I said, what you just read a moment ago, when they looked at it, most walls when they fall, they're going to fall how? You think they're going to fall this way or that way? Probably. Yeah, that's usually what they're going to do. They're going to fall with their weight. They said these came down like this. I mean, they came down. And exactly like that. It wasn't a falling like this. It just fell. And what we see is God, of course, God do whatever He wants to move those things and drop them to the ground. And that's why it killed everybody. It didn't just, we understood while they went in, of course, the burning and everything being done after that. But that's what we see taking place. So upon arriving at Jericho, we're going to see here, the spies found lodging. We just read the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab. Evidently, this would be a place where they would have had convenient access to information, and nobody would have thought anything, men going in to see a harlot. They wouldn't think anything of that at all. And of course, we know there's no reason for us to think that any wrongdoing was done by the spies with Rahab. That's not the case whatsoever. We see they're just there to spy it out, to see what's going on. And, she was basically, she was known also as basically the innkeeper or the host of a tavern that was there. And just a lot going on, I'm sure, as we see when you look at the history. The divine influence seems to be involved in their choice, placing a lodging. Of course, I'm sure God helped them, guide them to where they needed to go and be a part of that. It's also worthy of considerable note that later, of course, we know that Rahab marries Salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N, marries him, and he is a prince of the Jews, we would say, and is mentioned in the lineage of our Lord. She is Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. And very important to understand, she wasn't just, in the lineage of Jesus, but she was the great-great-grandmother of who?
David.
King David. She surely was. And so it's really interesting to see how that lineage works. And, at the end, I don't have time to get to that, some application stuff, but I'll say now, it shows us that, no matter what you've done in your life, if you turn to God and you're right with God, God will take care of you. God will bless you. And, and there's no one too far gone to be be taken care of. And that's the other thing we need to think about. And we see that here with this. Well, go ahead.
Did everybody march around the city, the women and children?
Everyone said, no, just the fighters. They were all on the east side still, just the men that went over. Just the warriors that did that. So let's go ahead and go on to the next area. Joshua 2:2-3. Someone read this for us, please.
And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country.
Thank you. So Rahab quickly learns about the kingdom and the others. Remember that they've been looking for them. They know what they've done. They know them. Sure, I guarantee you, a lot of people have probably been out spying, watching what Israel was doing, where they were going, what they were a part of. Any smart, people would do that. And it's not that Jericho thinks like, oh, no one can come and fight us. They just thought they were indestructible, but they do believe they could be fought. And that's what we see here. So they want these men, of course, they know there would be spies. They want them dead, which brings us now, of course, on to 4-6. If someone continue reading that for us, please.
Then the woman took the 2 men and hid them. So she said, Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And it happened as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you may overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof.
Thank you. So as we see this here, with the exception of the search of her house, she hid them in, of course, the roof, the stalks of the flax. This is where they would place them on the roof to dry, and they would get inside there. It was pretty thick, I'm sure, and they weren't going to be worried about being seen there. Her plan had even better chances of success with each passing moment, especially since it was dark and the king's messengers, basically, arrived, and so it would be dark up on the roof. They wouldn't be going up there. This action on Rahab's part should not be considered unusual, because everyone's like, oh, she lied. I mean, she straight out lied. You're right, she did lie, yes. But that's the way she was living. I mean, think about it. She was a harlot, no telling what else was going on in her life. A lot of the people back then, they didn't see a problem with certain things that God said was wrong. And that was the whole deal with the Canaanite, society. All Canaanites would say is that lying was a normal part of their life, and we understand that that everything was happening here. But also, some try to bring into this, say, well, Genesis 18:19, talked about how it was a common practice for their sacred protection. When someone came into your home, you were required to offer them protection. But we see here there's a little more to that. God doesn't say, as long as you're protecting somebody, it's okay to lie. That's not the case at all. We know that's not right. So we see this happening. We know lying is wrong under any circumstances. Revelation 21:8, very clear. We see that. Rahab was caused to speak to the searchers by her obligation, and lying was probably not looked at, as we said, as the same as being wrong as we do today or as God did with his people. It's true that the men were not in the house. She was right about that. They weren't in the house. They were on top of the house, if you want to say it like that, I guess. But also we find here that we do know later that what she did, because of the way she turned to God, once again, even though she did that, somewhere down the road, she had to ask forgiveness. She had to make herself right with God. And she did that by moving into the Israelite family, becoming a proselyte, basically, as we would see with them. James 2:25 makes it very clear that she was justified by her works, by the things she did for God. And it was very important to see that, which brings us down to verse 7. Let's look at verse 7. Someone want to read that for us, please.
Then the men pursued them by the road to the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, they shut the gates.
Thank you. No one knew they had Ford dealerships back then, did they? No one knew about that, right? I mean, look at that. Ford was already building back then. No. Of course, we know as we see this here, we see that that they shut the gate. It says that means basically they thought the men were maybe still in the city, so they wanted to, close them in there, keep them there. The ford, as we hear the fords. The fords means that it is a low crossing across the Jordan River. It was a shallow area, and that's what they refer to, and that's the way people would get back and forth. So they thought for sure if they're going to cross the Jordan, where are they going to head to? They're going to head to the fords. They got to be heading there. It's the only way across that we would see. And so it's interesting to find out, because basically what's going to happen is, I'll show you in a moment, is the two spies are here going to where they're going to try to run away. Here's the king and all his men, and they head this way to the east to go to the Jordan while they're going this way. They went the other direction because, of course, Rahab knows the history of how they search, what they do. She knows how many days they usually spend when they're ready to come back because they're tired, and that day was 3 days. We see that again, so they'd be okay from there, which we'll find out in these next verses. So we'll go ahead and read that for us, verses 8 through 9.
Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you.
Thank you. So here we see, of course, that they were resting, basically. They were going to take a rest. Didn't know how long they would have to be there hiding, as we see with the flags. She acknowledges, this is what's awesome, is that this first point we see where Rahab, she acknowledged her faith in God. She acknowledged her faith in him in these verses. And, she says, following the reports from the evidence, the beating of the Amorites, that they destroyed the Amorites and so on, they said basically the entire country, all the land, all through here, people are worried, they're concerned. Faint-hearted means that they're really concerned. They're really worried what's going to happen and thinking, if they could beat the Amorites, they could probably beat just about anybody, is what they were getting at here. So as we think about this, you and I today, we need to think the same thing. Here she is helping them out. But it's all because of her faith that she had in God, that God was that God was one that chose these people to bring them out, and that he was remarkable with the things that he had done. As we know, you and I today, it's so important for us to do the same thing. We need to observe the will of God. We need to obey it. We need to look to it. We need to follow it. We need to understand that it's a call of courage to be strong, stout, solid, firm in hearing. You think about this. Rahab did this. She took her life in her own hands by doing this for these men, for God, really, when it comes down to it. And you and I today, it's like verses like this in 1 Corinthians 15:58. About our obedience, it says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast and immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And we know that Rahab was already doing this, but she would also find out more with the importance. And we see that with her being in that lineage where she's at, of how important she was to God and was to this very beginning. Remember, this is the first city they're going to attack in the land of Canaan. And it's real huge, and it needed to go right. And if the people decided not to follow and do what God said, I guarantee you, guess what? Those walls would not have come down. They wouldn't have happened. But they did what he said to do, and that's what we find, as we'll see next week. Let's go ahead and continue to read Joshua 2, verse 10. If someone read that for us, please.
For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites and were on the other side of the Jordan, Sidon and Or, whom you early destroyed.
Thank you. So, here, when we look at her strong convictions in God and her faith, like, why does she have it? It's the same way with you and I today. Romans 10:17 says what? Faith comes by what? Hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Now, this wasn't the Word of God she was reading, but she was hearing things about God and the importance with it. And that brought her faith to where it was. She revealed that she had heard about the Red Sea, about the drying up, and how God allowed them to cross there, and then basically killed all the Egyptians that were following them. That's huge. There's no way. She knows like this. There ain't no way these Israelites can just push that water back. That doesn't happen. It had to come from that of God. So the news of the destruction of not news of the destruction of the Egyptians wasn't only huge, but also that of Sihon and Og, as we see with the Amorites. So that was very big to see and understand. And that helped her with her strength, with her conviction. And I believe also when you see this of Rahab, it's amazing what her conviction probably did to others there in Israel and what they saw, what it would do for her family too. Because remember, it wasn't only Rahab that would survive, this was her family also, as they would come there into her house. Let's continue to read. So read verse 11, please.
Then as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is good in heaven above and on earth beneath.
Thank you. So she makes it very clear, what happened, that we see here, that their hearts melted. They no longer, all these people probably had courage, not in themselves, but in their army, in their army that was able to take care of things, in their king, and so on. But she said that was what? gone. I mean, that when they heard about these things, it disappeared. And now it does say, as soon as we heard these things, and some give reference, who is the we? Well, more than likely, it's not just her and her family, it's the entire city. Everything's going out and about. And remember, her being a harlot, she's going to hear a lot of people, a lot of things were going on, a lot of gossiping, a lot of things are taking place more than likely. And so we see that. So now brings us into verses 12 to 14. If someone will go and read that for us, please.
Now therefore, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token. Spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they had, and deliver our lives from death. So the man answered her, our lives for yours, if none of you tell the business of ours, and it shall be, when the Lord has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you.
Thank you. So no, is it? Yeah. I mean, here it's kind of like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Like we see here. But is there anything wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with her asking? I've done this good thing for you now. Is there anything wrong with her asking for a favor? Asking for something back? Not at all. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And this is what's remarkable, is that she has the faith that these men that she doesn't even know, she's only talked to them for just a little bit, that they will actually do what they're saying they're going to do. She asked for that token. That would be that vow that we would see here, that they would swear to her this happening. And this once again shows her just how much faith is found in her to be able to trust these men and to look to that, especially with what she's going to do. She wants all of her family to be safe, and she explained that very well. And she said, and everything they have. Now, I will say something about that. We don't know, if they were able to keep everything, because they all had to go where we're going to find the next verses. They all had to come into Rahab's house. And we don't know how big her house was. We don't, like we said, could have been an inn, could have been a cabin. We don't know, but we do know that it was within the walls. We're going to find that in a moment. But everything that was there, doesn't matter what they had, would be protected. It would be taken care of. And that's what's remarkable, seeing all the walls fall, except for, think about it, one section, one little spot. And that's where her house would be. So the spies promised Rahab, yes, we'll take care of you. We will keep you safe. We will take care of this. And, it's kind of amazing to think they do it, but they can. And they're going to go in and get her, of course, we see, and all this beforehand. And after all this takes place. So let's go and look at verses 15 through 16. Someone read that for us, please.
Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. She dwelled in the wall. And she said to them, get to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Afterward, you may go your way.
Thank you. So as we see this here, notice once again, we said it is to dwelt on the wall. That means basically her house was in the wall, in that area there. She knew the easiest way for them to escape. She knew everything. She knew how to get them out of there and where to go to. And like we said, remember all the men, the ones that were part of the army, as they went to go look for them, they all went to the east. They all went to the Jordan River. Let me show you this picture here. Here's Jericho. Right here is part of the old Jericho that we would be speaking about. Notice the mountains in the background back here. You have mountains here. As you get over here, they get a lot steeper. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But there it is there. As you see, it comes all the way around, and this is what we have. Now, this was built now, that wasn't then, but you think about this wouldn't be some easy climbing. I mean, this would be an area that you want to get. You want to go to the crevices, where you can hide, where you can stay away from everything, because they had to be gone for 3 days, 3 days. But the great thing about it, none of the army was looking for them there. Let me give you an idea what it looks like on a map when you look at the areas here. You see, here's Jericho. So you see, here's the river. Here's the Jordan River right through here, so you can see the basin. And there's all these mountains right there behind them. There's these higher ones that are quite a ways out, probably more like 10 miles or so. So they just went up to these ones right here. So they're totally different areas, being protected. She knew the habits of the pursuers, knew what they would do, knew how long they would stay out. So she told this to all of them and moved forward from that, which brings us to verses 17 and 19. If someone read that for us, please.
So the men said to her, we will be blameless of this oath of yours which you have made us swear, unless we come into the land. You bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, unless you bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household to your own home. So it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head. And we will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our heads, if a hand is laid on him.
This is a remarkable oath. You know, it really is when you think about it. You know, the spies showed their honor and reliability by repeating their vow to Rahab, but they had conditions. They had conditions, and their conditions were, you know, you had to put the scarlet rope out. Same one they were being let down on, so they would be recognizable to them. Of course, scarlet, you know, meaning red. And it's really interesting with this stuff that we see here. You know, the sign of pledge, this being taken care of, but they make it very, very clear. You have to stay where? In the house, inside. He's saying God will save you and take care of you only if you remain inside where you need to be. If you go outside, that's on your own self. If you die, that's on your own head. Your blood's on your own. He says, but if anybody hurts you while you're in your house, that's on us. God's protection is remarkable right here of what's happening and what's taking place in this moment. I think it's really interesting. It's you know, the scarlet line, the red kind of reminds us of Egypt. You know, with the blood being put on lintels, where you know the passed over, as we would see there from them. But here's what's interesting. You know, staying with inside. There are so many stories in the Bible where God talks about His safety, taking care of others inside something. And when you think about the Ark of the Covenant, the ark, the boat, you know, God said, you go inside and you stay inside. You know, you won't come out. You'll be saved through this. Same thing when you think about another example was Paul. You know, Paul was on a ship and he told the men there, he says, do not get out of the ship. There's a big storm. If you get out of the ship, you're going to die. You stay in the ship, you're going to live. Why? Because God told me so. And you know, and that's what we see here, that God has used it with that. And it doesn't end there, brother. It even goes to you and I. You know, that He tells us, because if you want to be safe, you know, your spiritual safe, where you be in heaven, you have to stay in the church. You have to be in the church. You have to be in Jesus, is what He's saying, in His church. And stay there for your safety. That's so important. And God talked like that throughout many, many different passages throughout the Bible of that safety that's found in it. In fact, James, we see here, chapter 4, verse 7, says, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will do what? He will flee from you. Think about this right here. So people are like, how am I going to be safe from the devil? It's very clear. Submit to God. Stay within Christ. And that's what we find here, that protection will be there. So that's the big part there, was that they would remain in the house, they'd be safe. Imagine her telling all of her family. And, you know, people would be like, yeah, that was really hard to convince them. No, because remember, everybody in the town is worried about the Israelites. They're worried what's going to happen because of what they've heard and what they've told. So I don't think it was probably that hard take that much convincing to bring them over to there. Which brings us now to verses 20 and 21. Come on, thank her. There we go. 20 and 21, so we'll read that for us, please.
And if you tell this business of ours, then we will be free from your oath which you made us swear. Then she said, according to your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. She bound the scarlet cord and went down.
Thank you. So, you know, it went down, this went beyond the oath. You see, it went a little further. And, you know, he knew that there was a lot of talking probably goes on there in that area. And he said, you will say nothing. If you say anything to anybody, what's going to happen?
We don't have to keep our word.
Exactly. We don't have to keep our word. It's over. And so, you know, so he says, if these conditions ignored, altered, or changed in any way, that'd be it. You wouldn't be kept. You wouldn't be kept safe. And that was very, very important, which brings us down to verse 22 and 24 that we see here. Someone read that for us, please.
They departed and went to the mountain and stayed there 3 days until the Pursuers returned. The Pursuers sought them all along the way, but did not find them. So the two men returned to the city from the mountain and crossed over. And they came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and told him all that had befallen.
Verse 24. Come on. There we go.
And they said to Joshua, truly the Lord hath delivered all the land into our hands, for indeed all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us.
Thank you. So here once again, you know, the safety and the successful deliverance of the spies was provided by God. Took care of that. You know, it says when they pursued him, they didn't pursue him in the mountains. They were still looking in the area. They didn't. After 3 days, they just went back to their regular everyday lives as the people inside the city, being faint guarded, of course. But it's shocking. You know, if they were that scared, you think they would have searched how long? Longer, or long enough to find them. I mean, to figure it out. You know, you send them in all directions, you would think. But this once again shows basically the thoughts of the people of Jericho, the king. You know, it wasn't that they weren't thinking that maybe they'd come fight, they would, but they thought they were protected within their walls. That's why God used those walls that way, why he did this. And we see this. So, just promised by God that they would see this. 2 slides, I had 2, oh yeah. I guess not. I thought I had 2 slides there. Let me see. Hold on a second. Nope, okay, I don't. Okay, I thought I did. But as we think about this, as we get ready to close with it, I've got 1 minute left. Just a quick application as we see all this happening. Next on Sunday, we'll continue, of course, into chapter 3, where Joshua will rise early in the morning, as he always did, in the Acacia Grove, and going to talk about and talk with God and things that are going to happen here. But you and I today, we need to be creating faith. Meaning the same thing here, that, you know, God creates faith for us to look to that faith, to be a part of that faith, and to follow in it. And we can. And that's what we saw throughout the story, throughout all we've seen so far from Moses, from Egypt, all the way out to Joshua right now. And it needs to be indiscriminate faith, meaning anybody has the ability and the will to come to God, to be saved. And some would say, yeah, I mean, Harley could do well. I always think that, but I think, you know, Paul is always the greatest example, of course. But Paul was already a follower of God. You know, he thought he was doing right by God. Here's a person that had nothing to do with God. You know, they were looking at the Canaanite gods and the way things are, and she still found that. And finally, there's necessary faith. We have to have faith in God to find ourselves. And that's what we see before I close in James 2:25-26 about Rahab here. It says, likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. So, in other words, you know, you can't have faith without works. In other words, faith is action. And if you're not having action in your faith, you really don't have faith. And so that's what we see here. So we'll close with that. Appreciate all the comments or anything. Any questions before I close out? Nope, we'll leave it there. All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.